If you have your Bibles, I encourage you to go ahead and turn over to that passage, Matthew 22, verses 37 through 39. And as you're turning over there, I want to set the backdrop on where this passage stands. You see, we are in the last week of the earthly life of Jesus the Nazarene. He has been in a running discourse with the scribes and the Pharisees, and every step of the way they've been trying to entrap him in his own words. They've been trying to outdo him and outsmart him, and every step of the way Jesus has outdone them. He has proven them wrong, he has stayed consistent, and they have not been able to trap him. And so what they try to do is send in a big dog, so to speak. A lawyer, a man who spent his days immersed in the Jewish law, who knew it better than anyone else in his time. He walks up to Jesus believing he has the trump question and asks him, verse 36, "Teacher, which is the great commandment in the law?" You remember what Jesus says? He says, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind." But he doesn't stop there. He gives them a bonus answer and says, "And the second is like it, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets." Now we get that, don't we? We get the great commandment. We even get the second great commandment, but not entirely. We know that we're supposed to love God. We know that we're supposed to love ourselves. We know that we're supposed to love everyone around us, to love our neighbors. But the application of it, but the practice of it is a whole other thing entirely. We get loving God. Loving God, to some degree, is easy. It's not always comfortable, but it comes naturally because God is loving. He's kind. He's gracious. He's merciful. He's caring. He's compassionate. He's willing to sacrifice for us. And on top of that, He wants to spend eternity with you and with me. Characteristics like that make God easy to love. We get loving ourselves to some degree. After all, part of the reason we're here this morning is concern for ourselves, concern for our soul. We want to push ourselves closer to that goal, closer to eternity with God. To some degree, it's easy to love ourselves. We get that. It's the third part that gets us. You see, most of us know the second great commandment, but the implication, the practice of it, another story. That's where it gets hard. Why? Because our neighbors are not God. Our neighbors are not like God. They can be very uneasy to love. They can be mean. They can be rude. They can be incompassionate, unkind, unloving. They can be a lot of ugly things. And so we tend to cherry pick who our neighbors are, who this passage applies to when Jesus says to love our neighbor. But He's very clear in His implication. We aren't allowed to pick and choose. And that can put us in a bit of an uncomfortable position. Today, I want to talk to you about the second greatest commandment, how it fits into our lives, and how we can enhance the love spoken of in Matthew chapter 22. But first, I want to talk to you about a story. I want to go back 100 years, over 100 years really, to April 15th, 1912. It's a starlit sky. The calm waters of the North Atlantic are being stirred by the bow of a truly incredible ship, an engineering masterpiece, the HMS Titanic. A master achievement, an engineering marvel. It said that deckhands would affirm that not even God Himself could sink this ship as people were boarding. It's on its maiden voyage from Liverpool, England to New York City, but as you and I know, she will not complete that journey. Because she rams into an iceberg and fractures her hull, and in roughly 2 hours and 40 minutes, she will sink. She will plunge 12,000 feet below the surface of the North Atlantic, and on board that night were roughly 2,224 souls. And notice the distinction, we're not talking about passengers, we're talking about souls, because in the grand scheme of things, that's what they are. And of those 2,224 souls, 1,517 would perish in 28-degree frigid water. 711 would survive. And that's a terrible thing when you stop and think about that. The number of lives that just ended. Eva Hart, when she recounted that night, one of the survivors said, "I saw the horror of it sinking, and even more the dreadful, the cries of the drowning people." It had to be a horrible night. Unlike any other, worse than anything you and I can possibly imagine 1,519 souls begging for their lives, crying out, but no one to come and to save them. Now, I told you that story because of a sad truth that accompanies it. So many more people could have been saved that night. The number of survivors could have been so much higher than 711, but something was missing. What exactly was it? The Titanic was originally designed to carry about 68 lifeboats. They could hold 65 people each, which would equal about 4,500 seats. And if you're keeping up with all the numbers I'm throwing at you, that's more than double the number of people that were on board the Titanic. It would have been fine if they went with the number that was recommended, but there was a problem. You see, it's a luxury liner, it's a cruise ship, and the owners of the Titanic were so proud of it. They were so proud of the deck, and they wanted people to see it. They didn't want it cluttered up with lifeboats. And so what they decided to do was, instead of taking the 68 lifeboats that were recommended, they opted for 18 lifeboats. 2 collapsibles, 2 dirigibles. And that was it. That means max, if every single seat was filled, they could carry 1,176 people. They were 1,046 seats short from the word go. There was no way, if something happened, that they could save every single person on board that ship. You see, there was something missing. They were more concerned about their cruiser and their ship than they were about the passengers that were on board. Here's another piece of information you might not know. When the lifeboats were lowered, did you know about all of them were left half empty? Only 28 people boarded boat number 7. 24 had on boat 5. Boat 9 had 26 people and only 12 passengers got on boat 1. By the way, there's supposed to be 65 passengers on each one of those boats. And they're lowering them with 12 people in there, with 26 people in there. They were unfilled mostly because they would only allow women and children of first class onto the lifeboats. And as those people sailed safely away from the Titanic, the ship went down and 1,500 souls were cast into the water, some with life jackets and some without. All the while, those lifeboats stood at a distance and would not come in, regardless of how much people begged, how much they pleaded and screamed and cried for salvation from icy waters. No one would come in. Why? Because something was missing. One more piece of trivia and we'll get into the meat of the lesson. 2 other ships sailed that same lane that night. One was California, and she lay 12 to 17 miles away, and she would not come to the rescue. The Samson was the other, and it being 5 to 7 miles away was even closer. And we have their ship logs. It is recorded that they both saw the flares of the Titanic. They both heard the distress signals of the Titanic. They both knew how many people were on board and that they were drowning, and they both decided not to do anything. They both actually decided to turn around and go in the opposite direction of the Titanic and to allow those people to drown and to die. And I share that with you. I share all that with you because it incenses us when we hear that. If you were like me and you hear those details, you start thinking to yourself things, well, if I had been there, I would have done it differently. How could those people be so callous, right? We sit there and we think to ourselves that we would have done it differently. We wouldn't have allowed that to happen. We would have saved people, but would you? Are you sure about that? Would you really have done it differently? The reason I'm sharing this lesson with you this morning is because what happened on the night of April 15th, 1912 is our story. Because we live in an ocean of drowning souls all around us who are dying in their own sin. Men, women, teenagers. And instead of our congregations being rescue ships and Christians being lifeboats, we become nurseries where our focus is more on the color of the carpet or the style of the pew than saving souls. You see, some studies have shown that the average Christian, 95 to 97% of Christians, will not impact anyone spiritually outside of their family in their entire lives. Now, I don't know how recent that statistic is. I don't know how accurate that is. But is it accurate for you? Is it accurate for me? Is it true of us? Is it true of Warner Robins? I hope not. I hope that we are bigger than that we can do more than that. You see, fulfilling the Great Commission, being a soul winner, is directly connected to fulfilling the second greatest commandment, being a soul lover. That sounds like a simple statement, but I want to camp out here for the rest of our time together today. I want to talk to you about what's involved with that idea and see what it really means to love your neighbor as yourself. The first point that I want to make today is that love crosses all barriers. If you'll turn with me to Galatians 3, verses 26 through 28, Paul has set up the question, who are the sons of faith? Who are these people? And throughout these few short verses, he will begin to answer that question. For you are all sons of God through faith in Christ Jesus. For as many of you who were baptized into Christ have put on Christ. There is neither Jew nor Greek. There is neither slave nor free. There is neither male nor female. For you are all in Christ Jesus. Now I know in context, this is talking about relationships being on a level playing field. But when we take it and we apply it to how we love each other and how we interact with each other, the implications are staggering. I know my brothers and sisters in Christ. I know that in most cases, if it came down to gender, we would never allow that to get in our way. We care about souls, whether you're male or female. We're interested in your soul. Sometimes for some people, race might get in the way, but if that's an issue for you, you need to check yourself at the door. Because we serve a God who is colorblind, and he is just as interested in the soul of a black man as he is a white man or any other race that you can throw out there. If that's an issue for you, it's not an issue for God, and it doesn't need to be. Now, social issues, that's a different story. It was true on the Titanic. Not one single passenger from second or third class was allowed on a lifeboat. Only the affluent, only the first class. If anyone else got on, it was purely by accident. They even went as far as to try and lock and barricade the second and third class down below. They went as far as to threaten them at gunpoint when they got onto the second floor, but they overcame them. They stampeded, they got to the deck, but by the time they got there, guess what was on? The lifeboats. Those who were of a lower social class were left stranded on a doom ship. Over 1,000 people died because they were not of the right social status. We wouldn't do that in church, would we? I mean, if a man or a woman comes into our congregation and they're not dressed properly because they don't own nice clothes, how do we treat them? If a man or a woman walks off the street and they look nasty, they reek of urine, they haven't bathed in weeks, but they want the truth, how do we treat them? If someone with a recovering drug addiction, covered head, toes, and tattoos, and a history full of mistakes because they didn't know better when they were kids, how do we treat them? Do we turn our nose up and we say, you're not like us? What are you doing here? If we have the inclination to do that, we need to check ourselves because we are sinners made saints by the grace of God, nothing more and nothing less. Love crosses all human, all social barriers. The Apostle John says, my little children, let us not love in word or in tongue, but in deed and in truth. 1 John 3:18. Or Paul said, therefore, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all, especially to those who are the household of faith. Galatians 6:8. Those passages don't just talk about caring about people, they talk about us caring about people. They talk about you and I, as New Testament Christians, caring about everyone at every time. Remember earlier how we talked about the California and the Samson, how they wouldn't come to the rescue? The California was an interesting ship. The captain of the ship was a man by the name of Stanley Lord. He was a small man, not in stature, but in attitude. He was jealous of luxury ships. He was jealous of their captains because he thought he was more deserving than them. He thought he had the right to be a captain. The fact that he'd been passed up made him angry. And so when the crew brought the SOS of the Titanic to him, he said, I can't be bothered with this. Leave luxury liners to worry about luxury liners. He told them not to bother them anymore, and he lay safe and sound in his bed while 1,519 souls drowned all around him because he didn't want to move, because he could not be bothered. The station was 5 to 7 miles away, even closer. In person, they saw the flares coming up from the Titanic, but you see, there was one problem. The Samson was a hunting ship. It was for seals and sea lions, but it was in forbidden waters. They weren't legally allowed to be there. And so they had to make a decision in that moment. Do we risk becoming criminals and save souls, or do we save ourselves and turn in the opposite direction? And by all accounts, it was an easy decision. They saved themselves. They turn in the opposite direction. They leave all of those souls to die. What about us? What do we do? How do we respond? I want to talk to you about a man named John Harper. John Harper was a preacher who was going from England over to the U.S. to preach a gospel meeting. He is a recent widower, so he has his daughter Annie with him in tow. And when they knew the Titanic was sinking, he took his little girl to a lifeboat, kissed her on the forehead, handed her to someone on one of the lifeboats and said, "I'll see you again one day." And when he knew she was safe and secure, he headed to the aft deck. You see, the Titanic is going down at this point, worse and faster than ever, because the hull is filled with water. So at this point, the weight is simply too much. It snaps the ship in half. It throws hundreds of thousands of people into freezing water, including John Harper. And when John Harper bobbed to the top because he was wearing a life jacket, you know what he did? He started swimming from passenger to passenger. John Harper knew something. He knew he was going to die. He knew that a person could not survive in these conditions for very long, not in 28-degree frigid water. If you've never been in freezing water, by the way, if you've never had that experience, you should know that it's awful. You should know that every second it knocks the breath out of you, that it drains your energy away, that you feel yourself growing weaker and weaker by the instant, as if there is no escape. And this man began to swim from passenger to passenger and asked what their spiritual life was. If they knew about Jesus, if they were a Christian, if they said yes, he'd keep swimming. If they said no, he would pray with them, he'd ask to baptize them, and then he would carry on. There was one young man who was holding on to some debris, and Harper asked him, "What's your spiritual condition, son?" And the man replied, "I don't have one." And Harper asked him if he was willing to change that, if he was willing to talk to him. The man said no. So Harper backed up, he took his life jacket off, and he handed it to him. He said, "You're going to need this more than me." He continued to swim, asking people about their spiritual condition, and with the last bit of life he had left in him, he swam back to that boy. He said, "Would you reconsider?" He said, "Yes, I will." Harper baptized him, and then Harper died. I don't know much else about this man. I don't know anything about his personal life, but I know what wasn't missing. He cared. He cared for people. He knew he was going to die, but he dedicated what little bit of life he had left to saving as many people as he could. 2 months later in a formal hearing, they talked to the young man who was one of only 3 survivors from the water. And Mr. Harper came up and he said, "He is a hero. He saved my life twice that night. Once when he gave me his life jacket, and once when he helped me to know Jesus better." What was not missing there was that John Harper cared. You were dying. I am dying. Every day is one day closer to that eventual end. Unless Jesus comes back in our lifetime, that is just the fact of the matter. So let me ask you, what are you going to do about it in the meantime? You and I, we swim among a sea and ocean of lost souls. What are you going to do about it? Are you content to just sit there and just drown and let everyone else drown around you? Or are you going to make a change? Love not only cares, our second point, love is courageous. Have you ever thought about how courageous it was for our Lord to come here? Have you thought about that? What it meant to become a man, to come to this cesspool of sin and filth, to be holy God with no sin whatsoever, and have to live among people like us. To know that you will die for those people, and who by rule of majority will for the most part reject you. Even on the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 7:13, he says, "Enter by the narrow gate, for wide is the gate, and broad is the way that leads to destruction. And there are many who go in by it, because narrow is the gate, and difficult is the way which leads to life, and there are few who find it." Jesus knew that, and he went to the cross anyways. He went to the cross. He wasn't looking forward to the cross. He didn't want to. Hebrews 12:2 tells us, "Looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is sat down on the right hand of the throne of God." He did not want to go to the cross. He did not want to endure that suffering. He despised that suffering, but he did it anyways. In that moment, he heaped up our sin on his shoulders. 1 Corinthians 5:21. We know that for a fact. He took on our sin so that we might become the righteousness of God in him. That is the courage of our Savior. That is the courage of Jesus. We talked about the lifeboats, how they refused to go in. They could see everyone drowning. They could see everyone dying. They heard their screams. They sat there and they listened to it, and they refused to do anything. Why? If you go through every single one of their responses, it all boils down to the same thing. Fear. They were afraid. You see, they were afraid that if they went back in, if they tried to save those souls, they would be capsized. Something would happen. The boat would flip over. They would fall in the water. There'd be nothing they could do about it. They'd die. So instead, they decided they were fine with sitting there and watching it happen. Everyone but one. Lifeboat 14 was driven by a man named Harold Lowe. He was a junior officer on the Titanic. He takes the boat in. He redistributes his passengers to other lifeboats because they would not help him. He says, "Okay, then you can leave." Puts them on other lifeboats, and he goes in and he begins to save passengers. Now, he could have been capsized. His boat could have overturned. He could have fell in and he could have died, but he decided the opportunity to save other souls was more important. He pulled 4 people into his boat. Now, granted, one of them did pass away before they could be saved, but he managed to save 3 people that day. And when you're talking about 2,000 people, when you're talking about 1,000 people, 3 people doesn't sound like a lot. But if you ask those 3 people, it made all the difference in the world. We're talking about being bold. We're talking about being courageous. Because there are things that keep us from evangelizing. Fear keeps us from evangelizing and loving like we should, because we're afraid we'll mess up our relationships, or because we'll be uncomfortable, or because we don't know how to do it. And none of those excuses are valid. Because we serve a courageous God who put aside his pain and his suffering and whatever could possibly go wrong to save us, and now he's asking for us to do the same. Because there are people who are dying. There are souls who are dying. And you think you being uncomfortable, or you not being sure what to say, is going to be a valid excuse when we stand on the day of judgment. Are their souls not worth more than that to you? Are they not worth more than that to me? We're talking about taking a little risk. Making ourselves vulnerable, going to people and asking them, "Do you want to know about Jesus, his gospel, his church?" It takes courage to do that, but we can and we have to. Our third and final point this morning is that love goes into action. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. John 3:16. Greater love has no one than this, than to lay down one's life for his friend. John 15:13. But God demonstrates his own love towards us, in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Romans 5:8. You notice how quickly love goes from a noun to a verb. How love is something that is active and present. That is our God. That is our Savior. There was a third boat on the water that night, the Carpathian. The Carpathia was captained by a man named Arthur Henry Rostron. The ship was carrying passengers to England. It's a cruise ship. But when they heard the SOS, when they heard the distress signal, even though they were 58 miles away, they immediately became a rescue ship. And right away, the berths became hospital rooms, beds were stripped of blankets, and sheets were brought up to the top in order that they might wrap up warmly those who survived. By the time the Carpathia got there, it was too late. The Titanic was down. 1,519 souls were dead in the water. However, they managed to rescue 711, all of the people in the lifeboats, who were still freezing, who were still at risk of hypothermia, out of the water. That's courage. That's love in action. Our goal should be to be Carpathia churches. Carpathia churches model what Christ intended his church to be. Carpathia churches get the second greatest commandment. Carpathia churches focus their energy on reaching this generation for Christ and working together to make whatever sacrifice is necessary for getting the mission completed. So what kind of congregation is Warner Robin going to be? I want you to do something for me. Be still. Be silent. I want you to think about quiet. When Eva Hart was recounting the night, like we talked about earlier, the Titanic went down, she said, I saw the horror of it sinking and even more the dreadful cries of drowning people. Make no mistake, even though it might be silent around you, we are still surrounded by the screams of dying people spiritually. There are dying men and women and teenagers, souls who are drowning all around me and all around you. When we get in the car, when we're in traffic, when we're surrounded by people, we are surrounded by dying souls. When we go to the grocery store, a ball game, people are dying around me and you. When we go to a restaurant or we spend time with our friends from across the street, we are talking about souls who are dying. And I ask myself, why don't I do something about that? And this morning I'm asking you, why don't we do something about that? We like to sit here and tell ourselves that people aren't interested in the gospel, that people don't want to give up their sinful lifestyle, and that is a lie that we tell ourselves so we don't have to face a more disheartening and more harsh reality, a more heartbreaking truth. Many people are going to end up in hell because we as Christians refuse to help them. Let that sink in. Let that thought sit with you. Let that make you uncomfortable, because it should. Many people are going to go to hell because we were too scared, because we were too uncomfortable, because we were too concerned with our own ongoing, our own lives to stop and to help them. The truth is, God intended his church to be a hospital for the sin sick, but we have turned it into a mausoleum for the saints, and we have barred the door shut. In an attempt to keep people out unintentionally, whether it be social status or simple pettiness, because we are afraid to open up. And in the process of shutting them out, we fail to realize we are just letting them go. You see, you have to answer that question that I mentioned earlier. What kind of ship is Warner Robin going to be? More importantly, what kind of lifeboat are you going to be? Do you understand the weight of what you and I are doing here, the magnitude of it as evangelists, what we are doing? I could call it life and death, but I'd still be selling it short because we're talking about eternity. We're talking about forever. We're talking about people's souls. It's so much bigger than life and death. It is so much more important than anything else we are doing. It is more important than jobs. It is more important than free time. It is the most impactful thing you and I will ever do as Christians to affect people's souls. So what kind of lifeboat are you? What kind of hospital are you? What are you doing to make a difference? Be a lifeboat for those drowning in the icy waters of sin. Let Warner Robins be a Carpathian congregation, church willing to do whatever it takes to save souls. It's going to take courage. It's going to take a lot of strength for you to do that. But we are not allowed to float through this life without taking care of it. We are not allowed to let these souls die around us. It might be the case tonight that you have been drowning in sin. that you have yet to obey the gospel plan of salvation and be added to the Lord's church, and if that is the case, we would love to talk to you. We would love to study with you and help you become part of this family. It might be the case that there's some things you need to repent of, that there's things in our life that we need to get right in regards to how we view souls around us. Maybe you just need love and support of your congregation. If there's anything that we can do for you, won't you come as we stand?